Hello and welcome. This is episode number 3 of Future Side Chat. Today we are talking vaccines. I'm joined today by some very regular scientists. Their names are Mike Cottrell and Nick Maddox. How are you guys doing? Oh yeah, you guys are still muted.
I'm
I
doing
broke
pretty
it.
well.
I broke it. At least you guys, well, Nick unmuted himself. There we go. How you guys doing?
Doing good. Oh, I like your haircut.
Thanks. See, it was a complete surprise.
You're shaving too.
Yep.
I don't support this shaving.
I didn't want to be bogged down by any excess hair.
Sure.
So today we are talking vaccines. As much as I would love to talk about facial hair all day, that was for yesterday, and now today we're vaccines. So vaccines. I mean, Nick, you wrote about this first in 2011. I think you cracked this case that nobody had really ever been talking about. Um,
Yep.
so
No one was
what-
talking about it at all until I wrote about it.
Do you want to give a little bit of background on what piqued your interest back in 2011, and maybe give us a bit of background on vaccines and what the problem is that's facing us now?
I think part of what piqued my interest was that I can't remember exactly what it was, but I think it was when we all had to get mumps boosters because mumps was breaking out on university campuses on the East Coast. Because there were a bunch of people that hadn't been vaccinated, and all of a sudden it was going wild, and I was like, "What the hell is this? Why is this happening?" And so yeah, that's what got me into it. And news reports, things like that. I think you had a second part to your question. What was that?
Well, so just describe what the actual specific problem is, that why these are coming back.
Well, I shouldn't have to. This has already been posted on the Future Side Chat blog, so I assume everyone's read it.
Well, it was also posted 3 years ago on Vodka and Equations.
Yeah, well, but to refresh the memory for those who read it in 2011,
Yeah.
there has been concern expressed over vaccines of any sort, and parents are choosing not to vaccinate their children because they're worried about side effects. That is the extremely short version of what's happening.
Yeah, specifically side effects that are either extremely rare or have no clinical proof of, in fact, clinical disproof of happening.
Yeah.
So things that people shouldn't be worried about.
Well, I think they've done studies with 8 figures of patients.
Yeah.
I think tens of millions of patients, and there's been no causal link established.
Right. They're basic, there are if you go on the internet, you can find all kinds of infographics and statistics about things that are more likely to happen than you get sick from a side effect of vaccines. Basically, I mean, there are some risks associated with vaccines. They're not 100% effective, but compared to having the disease, they're so much better. They're hundreds, if not thousands of times more better side effects than having the actual vaccine.
Yeah.
The big examples that have come up recently in North America are, as you mentioned, measles from the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, and whooping cough from the whooping cough vaccine. And so we actually can put a celebrity face on, as we usually can. There's somebody famous who has gone on record as perhaps saying that there's a link between vaccines and, in this particular case, autism, but it's not limited to people relating vaccines and autism.
I think it's more than perhaps saying.
So Jenny McCarthy is the person, and
Also, Jim Carrey.
Well,
He's in on it too.
He has to be though.
Well, they're not together anymore.
Oh, they're not? Oh, okay.
And Jenny actually this year went on record as saying that she doesn't think it anymore, and that but she basically she took like she ran like a mile in the direction of vaccines are bad, and this is like one or two steps back towards vaccines are good. Like she caused all this trouble, and now she's she has supposedly vindicated herself by saying, no, I don't think that anymore. But she's not promoting vaccines being good. She's just been quoted as saying that they're not bad.
Wasn't the whole thing like because her son, she self-diagnosed him with autism and
Right.
said it was because of vaccines, and now it's like, oh, actually he doesn't have autism, so it's all good.
Yeah.
That's kind of like, so I don't think it was even. I don't think it was like, oh, well, vaccines are okay, but it's like, oh, well, it's not relevant to me anymore, kind of thing.
Yeah. No, she did say that it was a mistake, and that she shouldn't have done all that work against vaccines. But it's kind of way too late now, and nobody really cares about retractions as much as they care about the viral nature of the original headline.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and people are still quoting the thoroughly discredited paper from the Lancet in like 1998, which originally suggested a link between autism and the MMR vaccine. And I mean, since then, it's even been shown. I'm not sure if it's been proven. They think anyway that autism actually starts in utero, so like before the baby is even born or has a chance to be vaccinated, they can develop autism. So that one is thoroughly debunked. But people, like, the damage is done, and people are still talking about it. They just don't realize that it's been thoroughly discredited necessarily.
Right, and the doctor, if I'm not mistaken, who did the research, I guess quote unquote research, has also been thoroughly discredited completely. Like, he admitted that it was fraudulent and that he did it for grant money, and that there was absolutely no scientific basis for the research. But I don't know that he's gone on record as being like as saying that he's a fraud, but it's clear that at least that research was completely fraudulent.
So he has officially retracted the paper?
The paper was retracted, yeah.
Okay.
But that, as is the case with a lot of papers that are retracted, that doesn't make headlines. They just sort of quietly remove it. And I mean, that works online, but anyone that has journals printed out or gets them delivered, it's still there.
It's there, yeah.
There's also a paper on like the benefits of homeopathy.
Yes, exactly.
And, yeah, so that guy is still promoting it, but like every time he tried to publish, they were like, okay, you are making really fantastic claims, so we'd like to, try and reproduce this experiment first. Yeah. And it's never been done, but the guy's paper is still out there.
Exactly. Well, and there are papers on homeopathy that are not retracted, that are still out there as.
Well, and they're probably not peer reviewed either.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing, is that with a lot of journals, you can pay to get stuff published that doesn't necessarily need to be peer reviewed, and all it takes is a news organization to run away with the headline, and things can get out of hand really quickly. So why don't we go a little bit back and talk about sort of why vaccines are so important. And just, I wanted to go through, I was looking at the FDA list of approved vaccines, and just looking at some of the biggest ones that have come out in the last century. So I would say the biggest by far is influenza. We're giving it new influenza vaccines every year, and they're still going on. The Spanish flu in 1918 killed millions of people, and it didn't. Wouldn't say necessarily stopped the First World War, but it certainly hampered it, because more people were dying from diseases than were actually being killed in combat.
It was after 1918 was after the armistice, wasn't it?
It was around. I don't think it was a direct cause of the end, but it certainly didn't help. Like the fact that the troops were just dying on their own.
No, sorry, but I thought that 1917 was the armistice, and they weren't actively fighting anymore, but it took till 1919 for the treaty, or something. Mike, do you know history?
Future history chat.
Yeah. Sports were also affected by that, but much less impactful in the World War. So smallpox is
Excuse me. It's
no,
been
Nick, no.
the Spanish flu
Let me
is
stop you right there.
responsible for half of the unawarded Stanley Cups in history.
This is a big deal.
It was Stanley Cups and bickering. Those were the two causes.
Yeah. On to more important things. Smallpox is another vaccine or another disease that has been completely eradicated, except for a couple of laboratories where they're studying its effects and how they can create other vaccines and that kind of thing. But smallpox is not a disease that people have to worry about anymore. You don't even have to get vaccinated anymore because there's none of it. Polio is another. I think there's still some cases of polio in Africa and in third world countries, but North America you don't get vaccinated. We went through the rounds of vaccination and it's gone now here. Measles, again, that one's coming back, but I was reading and they basically before 1963 when the vaccine was created, they had 500,000 cases a year, and then in the years after, like the 20 years after, it got down to 50,000 cases, and now outbreaks are like 100 cases a year. So, and that was in 2011. So the measles has actually started coming back, so that outbreaks are getting to a few hundred or even 500 cases a year. But it's still, even with these people not vaccinating, and I should mention that with measles and with a lot of these, it is school-age children that are in classrooms that are transmitting this disease because their parents are not vaccinating them. So hepatitis is another big one that's sort of more for traveling, but we have vaccines like Twinrix vaccine that you take when you're going to a tropical country. That's for 2 kinds of hepatitis. And then the other ones I thought of are just tetanus and rabies. Those are just, I mean, I've never gotten the rabies vaccine, but I know we got tetanus vaccines and boosters and all that in school. So I mean, there's really no discounting the importance of vaccines in the 20th century. It's improved our quality of life. The fact that they develop a new flu vaccine every year is really great because the flu virus is it's all over the place. So the flu vaccine is basically our best guess of what the next flu is going to be.
The flu vaccine also represents like many different.
Yeah.
Is species the word? Or
mutations?
Strains? Yeah. Like it represents 90% of like the mix of influenza you'll encounter in the wild.
Yeah. So there are. I don't even remember. We covered this in chemistry. There's H1N1. So it's like I think there's 5 different types of H and 9 or 11 or something types, and so you can't possibly cover all of them. So there are cases of the flu every year, but with the vaccine, you're way less likely to contract the disease, and if you do get it, it'll be a lot less severe because you've already got antibodies. And so that leads pretty well into, I don't know if, Nick, if you want to talk a bit about some of the sort of misconceived dangers of vaccines, like, for instance, people thinking that you can get the virus or that you will get sick from a vaccine because you're injecting yourself with a virus.
Okay. Well, normally when you're vaccinated against something, they're using either a sample of the virus that's already dead or perhaps sterilized. So they've done something to it. They've treated it somehow so that it can't actually reproduce. And if the virus can't reproduce, then you don't have an infection. So there are a lot of people that say, oh, I got the flu shot and then I got sick, like right away. That's actually like your body saying, oh, whoa, there's like flu viruses around. We gotta do something. And so you might experience, I don't know, chills, elevated temperature, soreness, like the symptoms you would get from an actual flu infection, but it's gonna hit you for a day or two maybe, instead of like knocking you out for a couple weeks as it would if you actually got the flu.
Yeah.
what are some other common misconceptions?
Well,
There's also people saying like, go ahead.
Well, I was going to just mention mercury, for instance, is one of the chemicals that has been in the preservatives of some vaccines. But I mean, any chemical, you hear the word mercury, and obviously people are going to think this is dangerous, and because mercury is poisonous. And it's important to know the difference between different types of mercury. I mean, mercury isn't always poisonous in every form. The fact that there's such a tiny amount of mercury in a vaccine to preserve it, the benefits of having it be preserved and stay viable for when it's actually injected is much safer than not getting the vaccine at all.
Well, and the dose makes the poison.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
like,
Yeah.
I've actually read up on that one specifically, and I can't recall the figures off the top of my head, but there's, the amount of mercury in a vaccine, and then there's the amount of mercury that your body can handle, and that's like, this much, or, some factor larger. And, yeah, actually, it's often the preservatives that cause problems with vaccines, like the severe reactions you'll hear about.
Yeah.
And that's because someone has I think ovalbumin is a common one. Like, people will be allergic to a formaldehyde preservative or an egg protein in the vaccine or something like that. That's usually, a different pre-existing condition that they're probably going to run into at some point or another. It just, if it's from a vaccine, that's probably when you found out, and that might be why you associate vaccines with bad reactions happening.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, just that the other thing that people tend to do, and kind of along that same line, is there's the chemical phobia, knee-jerk reaction to, oh, they're putting chemicals in my body or whatever, right? And it's like everything's a chemical, like,
Yeah.
like
Mike,
and
we need to preserve the integrity of our precious bodily fluids.
because there's no chemicals in our bodily fluids to begin with.
No.
Have you seen Dr. Strangelove, or is that just me
No.
going off on a really weird tangent? Okay. So watch Dr. Strangelove.
Okay.
He'll thank me.
So there's a really nice site that I found while I was doing research for this, vaccines.com. I'm really glad that they got that site, because if the other side got to it first. They have a little infographic of the odds that certain things will happen to a child, and they're saying that you're like 100 times more likely to get struck by lightning than to have an adverse allergic reaction to a vaccine. You're a little bit more likely to become a billionaire than you are to have an adverse reaction to a vaccine. And you're almost twice as likely to be elected to U.S. Congress as you are to having an allergic reaction to a vaccine.
I don't think Congress and billionaireism is as chance related as getting a reaction, but
No. It's not. It has nothing
Oh
to do
no,
with
my
it.
child has become a member of Congress. Oh God.
Why couldn't they have been struck down by an allergic reaction? Yeah. Another interesting. I mean, Nick, in your post, you posted a nice map that is actually. I mean, the version on the site, the source site, is actually interactive, and so it shows the outbreaks in North America that have happened. Almost all, if not all, caused by people not vaccinating their children.
Well, it is in Canada anyway, because I'm not sure what the cost structure is like in the States.
Not
Should be
enough.
better now. Well, yeah, I guess, but like, it's all the outbreaks in Canada basically are people who are choosing not to vaccinate children, just because of Health Canada, they will give it to you unless you specifically say, no, I don't want my child to have this vaccination. And I remember in Ontario anyway, I don't know if it's the same in Alberta, I think BC is jumping on this wagon too, but we would have kids suspended from school every once in a while because their vaccinations weren't actually up to where they needed to be.
Yeah.
So they would just some kids would just be booted out of school for a few days until they got the appropriate vaccinations and then came back. But like, yeah, MMR, it's like it's completely preventable. It's like I don't know how like what other thing you could liken that to, and that like you could have stopped this and it wouldn't have taken that much effort.
Yeah.
And here we are. We have an outbreak.
I read a pretty good analogy, and it's probably the closest you could get to choosing to not vaccinate, but it's akin to taking your child home from the hospital without a car seat and just putting your kid in the back seat, right? And you can say like, oh, autism. Every kid who's ever had autism was taken home in a car seat. So why would I take my kid home in a car seat? And then you get in an accident, and your kid dies, and it's like, oh well, it's completely preventable. And there's all this research and just common sense to say no, it's safer to put your kid in a car seat. But despite that common sense, you're making that choice for your kid, and you pay for it if something bad happens, I guess.
Yeah. So another question that I had, which is more just a sort of a ponderance, is what do you guys think the future of vaccines looks like? Are we gonna? I mean, there are, first of all, on the other side, we have a bunch of bacterial infections that are treated by antibiotics that are becoming immune to those antibiotics, that are developing resistances. So basically, people are getting sick in hospitals, and they don't have any drugs that can treat these. Do you think that vaccines, is this going to end, and people are going to start restart vaccinating their kids, or is this just going to get worse, and then we're going to start seeing bigger outbreaks? Are you guys more cynical or more hopeful? Well, Mike, why don't you?
I think it can only get worse.
You think we've basically we reached peak vaccination a couple of years ago, and now it's...
Because I think with the rise of the internet and the media and the minority side of science getting their word in edgewise and reaching that many more people, when you have people like Jenny McCarthy spreading that word around, like before you'd just be like, oh yeah, you're getting vaccinated, that's just what you do. But now there's this uprising of, a secondary source of information, and it's making people have second thoughts, and all the stuff about just a movement for the counterculture, I think, is kind of what it is. Like, oh well, I don't need to get my kid vaccinated. It's kind of like the hip thing to do, almost. What I mean?
Well, I've read several sites saying that you have almost like you have a choice. Know your options. You don't have to.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Right? And it's like, well, there's a reason why people have been doing it for this long. It's not like,
right.
I don't know.
It shouldn't be voluntary almost.
Yeah.
You're causing a danger to everyone else.
Yeah.
How about you, Nick? What do you think?
There is the Darwinistic argument that...
Oh no, we went there.
I don't know, like I don't think you can make that really, because it's a matter of choice for people. There's like definitely, I don't know, I'm sure there are going to be like cultural influences on that, like maybe after we have a few MMR outbreaks, and like as bad as it is, it might take some kids dying in order for people to like...
Having kids already died?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm
pretty sure
look into that.
Lots of kids have.
I think
in Canada though,
to raise alarms, but yeah, those outbreaks haven't been completely benign.
Yeah.
Well, that sucks, because it's gonna... How many kids are gonna have to die to like prove the point that maybe you should actually get your kids vaccinated? I'm sure a time will come when they figure that out. I just don't know how far away it is.
When they figured it out again, because they figured it out when vaccines were first
Yeah.
developed.
But that was when you had like 500 cases per 100,000 people or something like that. And then everyone was like, yeah, this is really bad. Like, I think there's one of the U.S. presidents was wheelchair bound because he had polio as a child.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like, stuff like that. Like, it was just so prevalent earlier on in the 20th century that people were like, yeah, this shouldn't happen. This is terrible. I don't know. Maybe we'll get there. I hope we get there.
Yeah.
Although, in terms of antibacterial resistance and things like that, I think that's a slightly different question if you want to go into that now.
Yeah.
Or if you want to finish up peak vaccination arguments.
Well, I mean, we'll just mention, I think it's worth mentioning that there's a bit of hope. We tweeted an article this morning about how the BBC has decided to stop giving what quote-unquote fair coverage to both sides of an argument.
Yeah.
If one is not scientifically valid and the other one has research and everything to back it up, they don't have to equally cover both sides.
That's excellent.
Argument. Yeah. If only Fox News could bring themselves to do that.
Have they ever fairly represented something that's supported by science?
Well, they have done things that
like they'll have people on, but they'll be like, Bill Nye, you're an idiot. Can you comment on that?
I've seen some interesting stuff come out of Fox News recently. When they had Dick Cheney on a few weeks ago now, Megyn Kelly called him out and basically said, "You were wrong about Iraq." Like he was basically saying, "We're wrong. We should go back. It was wrong of us to leave." And she called him out on TV and said, "No, you were wrong. Like you said there were weapons of mass destruction and there weren't." So I want to be hopeful. I don't know if like sort of those more sensationalist news organizations are going to start coming around and being reasonable and seeing the reason in arguments rather than just trying to sell ads and stir up controversy. But I'm hopeful that it'll get better.
Yeah, I think when it comes to high-profile stuff like that, like the war in Iraq or that kind of stuff, then yeah, you'll see a more, reasoned out thought process as opposed to representing both sides or whatever. But I think when you have, the little science pieces at the end of the newscast that are just filler, then you're gonna get like the secondary or the minority sides kind of coming out of the woodwork, and you're like, oh, well, that's kind of cool, and then that's all it's left at. It's like, no, that's not right. And maybe with those it's not a big deal. Like, with, I don't know, like what was it, the 2010, 2000 end of the world, 2010 or whatever it was. Or was it 2012? Yeah, that's what it was. Right, and that was a big thing, and all the news sites were spouting that, and it's like there's nothing to that.
Yeah.
But the Mayans, they were so wise.
Just look at them now. Oh, wait.
I was going to say, if they foresaw the end of the world, maybe they would have foreseen the Spanish coming. Just saying.
There's a lot of money in fear, and I think that's a good reason, well, not a good reason, but a reason why news organizations do cover this in the way they do, is that there's not a lot of money in people not being sick, and there's not a lot of money in people not being afraid of something. So it's not interesting to have someone come on the news and say a new vaccine was developed for some virus. You should go to your doctor and get it. That's not selling anything long term. That's just it's boring and it's menial.
Rob, what about Big Pharma wanting to sell their vaccines and keep people sick? What about that?
I saw a thing on that. Vaccinations represent what, like 3% of their total profits? It's like stuff for restless leg syndrome and boners that are actually like making them money.
Yeah. It's not great. So Another one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and this is something that I've been curious about since I was fairly young. Uh, and I'll start with a bit of background. So the cold is also a virus. So it's similar to the flu, uh, but it's not like the flu. It's not exactly the flu.
Well, the cold is a bacterial infection, and the flu is a viral infection.
No, the cold is definitely a rhino. Like the rhinovirus is.
Oh,
But so I started thinking when I first thought about it, when I learned that you can't take antibiotics to treat a virus, you have to get vaccines. You have to develop a vaccine. I thought, well, why can't, like, if we can't cure the common cold with antibiotics, why can't we just create a vaccine for the cold? And it's the case of the fact that it changes even faster than influenza. So you can develop vaccines for a specific strain of cold, but by the time you've developed it over a year or two, it's completely different, and the vaccine just doesn't work on the current strain.
Hmm.
And that's why you can get several colds in a season, because it changes so quickly that, like, you can almost go between two people and have one person catch a cold and then give it to the other person, and then it'll mutate and then give it back, and you can just sort of
That
stay
happens
infected.
regularly in our house.
Yeah.
Between the three of us.
It happens a lot in schools too, that
Yeah.
people get sick, and sometimes a really bad one will go through and you'll see one wave. Um, but in other cases, everyone for the winter is just sort of continually sick.
Yeah.
So yeah, that stated my curiosity on that topic, that you can't really, you can try to cure the cold with a vaccine, but it's going to take a little bit, like the next generation of vaccines, to sort of wipe out an entire family of viruses.
evolution, right?
Yep.
Jeez.
Nick, you had a point you wanted to bring up. Why don't you bring it up?
Oh, good. No, you were talking about like antibacterial resistant bacteria. Um, and like, if you have we all heard of C. difficile?
Yes.
Okay, well, Mike, it's actually a big problem in Quebec, so I would understand why you hadn't heard of it.
You
But
should watch.
no,
There's a video from, I believe it's either ASAP Science or Minute Earth, where they talk about this, but we'll put a link to it.
Okay.
okay.
Nick.
Okay. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah,
Continue.
so C. difficile became a big problem in Quebec in, I want to say, like the 60s or 70s or something like that. Maybe earlier, maybe later. But you would put people on broad spectrum antibiotics, so things that just wipe out everything, and then they would suddenly get even sicker and just they'd be gone, and they didn't understand what was happening.
Hmm.
But what they figured out is there's one strain of bacteria called C. difficile, and it's resistant to, I think, almost all, if not all, of the available antibacterials we have. And so what happens is when you're on a broad spectrum antibiotic, it exists in your lower intestines, in your gut. So you wipe out the entire microbiome, like all the bacteria that you have there anyway, and then C. difficile has no competition, nothing to hold it back, and so it just spreads and completely takes hold. And so what has become a viable cure for this and some other similar bacteria is actually a poop transplant. You take the feces of a healthy patient and then transplant it into like the lower intestine of another patient, which introduces like competitive bacteria and then can hold C. difficile at bay. So maybe the future of antibacterial, or the fight against bacteria is poop.
Yeah.
I think I saw an episode of House on that once. Didn't he
Uh,
do some sort of like poop transplant type thing? Maybe not.
Probably.
That sounds like
I
something
wouldn't
that
be
House would do.
surprised.
Yeah.
And
I don't
I
know if
mean
they did
the
that
work.
specifically, but they certainly had a lot of episodes that circled around
Broad
Um,
spectrum antibiotics and
antibiotics like
yeah,
not
yeah,
working,
right,
something that couldn't be cured by any of them.
yeah.
And have we heard about the Human Microbiome Project much at all?
A little bit.
Man, I gotta write a blog post.
Do you, do you want to
It's
talk
it,
about it a bit, or do you
it's
want to?
interesting stuff. Like it's actually like the study of the little biome inside a human gut and like the various effects that that can have on the entire human body.
Mhm.
Even like in rats and stuff like that, they did a fecal transplant from a healthy mouse to an obese mouse, continued feeding them the same, continued doing everything the same. But once you had that transplant, the obese mouse was suddenly in much better shape
Hmm.
because of poop.
Yeah.
I'm impressed at everyone's lack or ability to like not giggle at the word poop.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's gonna be like the next diet fad.
As opposed to enemas, a reverse
I know.
enema.
My friend Jenny is so skinny. I
There's,
just wish she'd donate.
there's something to be said for the fact that we, as a species, have gone from being supposedly so dirty in the sort of Middle Ages and Dark Ages, and before that, to now where we have all kinds of cleaning products and soap and body wash and shampoo and depurinizer and uh, exfoliators, and I'm making up words now, but at least one of
Yeah,
those.
exfoliators. Who's ever heard of an exfoliator?
Sounds
So,
suspicious.
but there was also, and we talked about this. I don't know. I don't think it was necessarily in an episode, but we talked about how, as well, the skin has a microbiome, and it's doing a pretty darn good job of keeping us clean and keeping us healthy. To the point that for the last two or 3 years, maybe, I have never. I make a point not to wash my face with soap. I rinse it with water, and like I'll clean it if it's dirty, but I don't put soap on it.
I
And
was really hoping that this was going to go. For the
no,
past 2 or 3 years, I have not bathed.
there are people who do that. I'm not one of them. I'm not in a circumstance. I would love to be, by the way. I would be a test subject for that. Not out of laziness, but out of science.
Mhm.
Um, but and I found that since doing that, my face, like my complexion, is way healthier since I stopped. Like I'll wash my hair and I'll wash my body, but like I leave the face completely alone, and it works wonders. Like I could spend $20 a month and on all these products and working really really hard, but this has worked really really well for me, and I wouldn't even think of going back to washing my face with soap or any sort of product. I would love to. I would love to expand the project to include not not cleaning myself with
Does
disinfectant.
Julia watch these just out of
No,
curiosity?
I've told her. I told her when we talked about the skin, the rinse, um, that would be amazing.
And her
I would
response?
absolutely volunteer for that. I think she said that if I went something like if I went to some compound and did it over there, that she'd be fine. As long as I wasn't near her.
You know, you put the ring on the finger, you go away to a compound. It's okay.
Well, there are lots of people who can get away with, or quote unquote get away with, either not washing their hair for a couple of days or washing their hair once a week, uh, or like skipping showers they just won't be affected. And I don't think I'm there, but I think that I'm not there specifically because, well, A, I exercise a lot, and B, I clean myself rigorously. So I would say my biome is sort of not really all that great. Um, you have all kinds of bacteria on you. It's terrifying to think about, except that you have to consider that we've been doing it like they were actually here before humans ever existed. and they've adapted to us coming along, but they're just on literally every surface you can possibly imagine, and a lot more prevalent than us.
Yep. A good quote on that one is like regarding Queen Victoria. I'm awful and can't remember when she was the monarch, but
That's not awful. That's fine.
if you read my post on the monarchy, you'd know how I feel, Rob. You should go back and read that again. No, it was like she used to bathe once a month, but like when they publicized the fact that she bathed once a month, they would say whether she needed to or not.
Yeah. Well, it's true.
As if there was a point where she wouldn't need to bathe after a month.
Yeah, well, you know, some months you get sweaty and dirty, I guess, and some months you just don't. Like 30 days elapse and you haven't really gotten messy.
Yeah. Past a certain age, you sort of stop spilling food on yourself and crawling around in the dirt. You're more refined.
I hope I never get to that age where I stop crawling around in the dirt.
So I think we're probably close to done here. Did we talk enough about herd immunity? Because I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions about vaccines, is that it's sort of the same lines as voting, where you go, I don't have to vote. My vote, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to impact the entire political spectrum with my vote. And
which I'm pretty sure is a direct quote from yourself from like 2000.
And I even went as far as to say, no, I know that on a global scale, like, that attitude is wrong, but I still think it applies to me. Even if everyone else gets that message and that's great and they vote, I still don't matter. But and in an analogy to vaccines, people think, oh, if everyone else is vaccinated, then my kids are safe. Even though these grown adults who are making these decisions were vaccinated and are not, like, they're immune to this virus specifically because they were vaccinated, they still feel like it's bad, and that basically the immunity of the herd of or the school or whatever group you spend most of your time in, if most of them or all of them are immunized, then it's okay if one person isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And again, technically, like in my case, that is technically true to a point, but we've started to tip back towards where enough people are not vaccinated that there are outbreaks happening because herds of people are not vaccinated, or there's enough in the herd that aren't.
Yeah.
Well, apparently, like, I think the actual figures on that are like it has to be greater than 80% to be vaccinated for the group to be resistant to whatever you're talking about. But yeah, we definitely plummeted below 80%, clearly, because we see outbreaks now.
Yeah. Well, and for one, my understanding of herd immunity is that the intent is to protect those who can't be vaccinated.
Yeah, exactly.
Not the ones who choose not to. And also, yeah, it's like, okay, if all you're ever going to be in is like at your school and at home, sure, and then your 80% is there. But what if you go to the mall or you go wherever else and your herd is going to change and you can't rely on every herd being vaccinated to protect you, right?
Can you imagine an anti-vaxxer support group? The place would have no immunity.
The best kind of irony.
And another sort of misunderstanding on that note is that herd immunity is a group phenomenon. So what the whole concept is that it prevents the virus from spreading, but it doesn't prevent individual unvaccinated people from getting it. So you absolutely if someone has been vaccinated and gets the flu, like has it transmitted to them, they can carry the flu but not show symptoms, and you can catch it from them. Like that doesn't necessarily protect you being around people who've been vaccinated.
Yeah.
It makes it less likely, sure, but it doesn't. You should still just get vaccinated. That's the moral of this entire
Yeah.
thing is don't be ridiculous. There's an interesting website, and I'll put a link. It's sort of uh, the most simple website you could ever possibly uh, create. It's called howdovaccinescauseautism.com. And
Did
you
the good
should
side
visit.
get that one, or did the bad side?
No. Shout out to Becca Hay who brought this to our attention.
Yeah. Yeah. So I won't ruin this podcast or this webcast by describing the site to you, but howdovaccinescauseautism.com. You should go check it out. Lots of good information on that site.
It's impeccable. Very good.
Yeah. Any last words, guys? I think I'm out of points to make other than go get your vaccinations if you haven't, or get your kids vaccinated if you haven't.
I'd like to know what Mike's daughter's situation is right now.
She's fully up to date. Thank you for asking.
Yes. Awesome.
You're one of the good guys.
I even got a flu vaccine this year.
Nice.
Nice. I think if I had to have a closing remark, it would be that if more people read my blog, we wouldn't have this problem.
If it was mandated reading, problem.
Get me Harper on the phone. Rob, you're in Ottawa. You can do that, right?
Yeah. Or if you're a Playboy bunny.
Yeah. I don't get that reference, but that is probably true.
Jenny McCarthy.
Jenny McCarthy.
Oh, yes. I understand that she would be, but I did not know that she formerly was.
Yeah.
Yes, that would work.
Yeah.
So one of us needs to get in absolutely great shape, then pose for some I don't know, some skin mag that housewives covet,
Yeah.
and then spread the message that way.
Okay.
Well, if any of us can get on The View, that would be a good start. Although I think she's just gotten, or she's left the show or something.
Yeah.
Also, I'm pretty sure that's a female-centric show.
That's why we would get on it, being the centerfold of this magazine.
For very different women, except the one guy, with very different views.
No, we wouldn't be on. We'd be a guest. We wouldn't be a host.
Fine, set your goals low, Rob.
Set your goals completely unreasonable, Nick. This has gone on too long.
Yes, I'm a girl.
All right, I'm ending this. I don't know what we're doing next week, but it'll be tech and we might do music. I'm thinking about music.
Just music?
I also might. I've been thinking about sports too. Stuff like instant replay and 4K and goal line technology with the World Cup going on.
Ooh, that would be good.
Bouncing some ideas around on that.
It's funny because World Cup and bouncing.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Wait,
So
what?
have a good week, you guys, and I'll see you next week.
Bye-bye now.
Hey, see you, Rob.
Bye.